Good morning. Okay. As long as I hold it, I should be okay. Right? People can hear? Yeah. Good? Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Frank. Welcome back from the break. I am glad to be invited back. I will note that I have a series starting this week, Wednesdays, at Beth Emet, a 4-part series on the strange story of Daniel. We'll be looking at 4 stories from the book of Daniel, starting with a classic, the one in which his 3 friends are thrown into a fiery furnace and survive. That one may ring a bell. And continuing through, again, some of the very interesting stories and what they have to teach us. But Daniel is not our subject this morning. This morning our subject is a man by the name of Michah. If it's not one thing, it's another, right? Okay. Michah, also known as Micah. Does that ring a bell? Anybody ever hear of? Yeah. Anyone tell me anything about him? My grandson. Your grandson. Okay. Well, hopefully your grandson is a different Micah, not this one. The truth of the matter is there are quite a few people in Tanakh, in the Bible, who are named Michah in Hebrew, Micah as it tends to be in English. But the one we're talking about comes from the end of the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges. And you see on the sheets, thank you to the office for making copies, save us from well-meaning people. When you say of somebody that they meant well, what does that usually mean? A disaster, right? A disaster. Well put. Somebody meaning well, right? The road to whatever is paved with good intentions, that sort of thing. It means they didn't do what they were supposed to do. They didn't get where they were supposed to get, and things didn't quite work out. And that's basically his story, but in a bizarre way. It's this really odd story. I'm going to explain what I put up here on the sheet in a minute. But the story itself is told towards almost the end of the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges. And we'll talk about that book and why that matters. But if you take a look at the first source on your sheet, it's a quote from Professor Yechezkel Kaufman regarding this story. And some of it won't make any sense until we actually see the story, but I wanted to show you one point within it. He says, the author tells his story in this book in an ironic tone, meaning there's meant to be humor here. The story is meant to show you people behaving in a way for which I think the word ironic fits. You'll see as we read the story. But an example of this, as brought by Kaufman, is that Michah speaks like an irrational, idolatrous fetishist. You have taken the God I made, by which I mean that, which Kaufman means. At one point in the story, somebody is going to come take away an idol that this fellow Michah has. And he's going to go running after him. And he's going to say, you've stolen my God! You've stolen my God! Which obviously is inherently problematic. Because if it's a God, how can somebody steal it? But he's put in this position of taking something very seriously that just is subject to mockery within the story. He has a kohen, a priest, for his idol, and the priest, as Kaufman continues, is described as a frivolous careerist, and you'll see what that means again in the story. And then you have the tribe of Dan that gets involved with this, and the people of Dan are fist fighters, lawless and thieving. Everybody in this story is weird. They're doing things that you look at and say, why did they do that? Why would they do that? And what am I supposed to learn from here? What is the message of this story that is found in your Tanakh? It is found in your Bible. And I guess that most people never get to see this story. In day school where they do study Tanakh, they don't get to this story. It's at the end of the book of Judges. And anything that's at the end of the book, you don't get to. So it's too bad, because the kids would find the story very, very interesting. But something is going on in this story, something that we are meant to learn from. It's from chapters 17 and 18 of the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, and I brought you significant chunks of the story on the sheets that will be able to see it. A little bit about timing, because it's going to matter. This is what I put here on the board. The book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, begins right after the time of Joshua. I apologize for anyone who knows this already, but a little bit of brief history never hurt. Joshua is the leader of the Jews when they enter into the land of Israel. He leads them for 28 years before he passes away. After him come a series of what are called in Hebrew Shoftim. The word Shoftim literally, judges, but some of them are never seen to judge anything in the biblical text. What they are instead are warriors of one kind or another. These were leaders. They tended to be regional leaders as opposed to leaders over all of the Jews. Remember that. We spread out through the country. This is an era way before telecommunications. And therefore just trying to communicate with everybody is difficult. And you'll see that if you read through the book, each one is associated with a particular region, a particular area. It's rare for somebody to be in control of all of the Jews at that time. I put here some of the major judges. There are 15 or 17, depending on how you count. But some of the major ones you may be familiar with, Deborah, she's relatively early on in the book. Gideon, not Gideon Bible that they have in the hotel, different. Yiftach, or Jephthah, if you've heard of the story of Jephthah's daughter, that's the one. Samson, who gets all the headlines, as well as the movies, apparently. And then the last of the judges is a prophet by the name of Shmuel, or Samuel. He is the one who would coronate first King Saul, and then King David. So this is a rough sort of list of some of the major judges people have heard of in chronological order. And I put two asterisks here, because the story of Michah, even though it's told at the end of the book of Judges, happens either in the very beginning of that period or almost at the end of that period. Unclear. The reason why it's unclear is because there's a verse that shows up in his story, which we're going to talk about, because it's a very important verse, which says that it happens at a time when Ein Melech B'Yisrael. My Hebrew speakers, what does Ein Melech B'Yisrael mean? There's no king in Israel. And it's usually taken to mean there's no king, meaning there's no leader, there's no authority. Well, how can that be if we had judges all through this period of time? So one view is that it's after Joshua died, before the first of the judges. The other view is that it's at the period of Samson. If you remember the end of Samson's career, he's taken captive by the Philistines. Right? And then ultimately he dies when he brings down the palace. So the other view is that it happens here, when he is being held captive by the Philistines, and therefore there is no functional leader of the Jews. So it's either the beginning or towards the end. And again, we'll get to why this is important a little bit later on, once we've seen some of the story. There's a lot of reason to think that it's actually in the beginning, even though it's put at the end of the book, and that it's really stuck here at the end of the book, but it happened earlier. The reason why it's put at the end of the book is because it has a lesson to teach, which belongs at the end, after we've read about all of the judges. And once we know the story and we know what the lesson is, we can come back to talk about that and its placement at the end of the book. But let's get into the story itself, because the story is such a weird story. I feel odd saying that, but it's true. You'll see. You'll see if you concur, you can vote on it at the end. Let's start. Take a look at source number 4. I may come back to sources 2 and 3. I use the JPS translation because it's available to be cut and pasted online. I lightly adapted it just to turn it into English, got rid of the untos and the thous and that kind of thing. But here's our story. There was a man in the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Michah. For those who are somewhat familiar with the geography of the land of Israel, you're talking about an area that is north of Jerusalem. That's the region you're talking about. His name was Michah. And I'm going to keep saying Michah because that's the Hebrew. Those who think Micah, just do the transition in your head, please. Michah and Micah, same person. He said to his mother, "The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, so that you uttered a curse which you repeated in my hearing, I have that silver. I took it." Well, now I don't understand what we're talking about. This isn't a strange story. I just don't know what it's talking about. What seems to have happened was that she had lost a very significant sum of money. Right? 1,100 shekels of silver, no matter what economic environment you're living in, is a lot of money. She thought it was stolen. She declared a curse on whoever stole it. And he, Michah, says to his mother, I have it. Unclear in this text whether he's saying, I stole it, I feel bad, or I took it to go get groceries and, it was never stolen and here it is, it's all fine. Right? It's unclear. The text doesn't clarify that. It could be read one way, it could be read the other way. It doesn't matter for our purposes. But he says to his mother, don't worry, here it is. To which she responds, blessed of the Lord be my son. She blesses her son, meaning, I issued a curse on whoever took it. Now obviously she feels bad because it's her son, so she gives him a blessing to counter the curse that she had already recited. Okay, fine. And notice the language of the blessing. She says, blessed of the Lord be my son. In other words, she is a religious person. Right? She takes her curse seriously. But she issues her blessing. If you want the original Hebrew, I brought it with me. Baruch b'ni l'Hashem. Blessed be my son to God. And the word she uses for God is the one that's written out in Hebrew, Yud, Hey, Vav, and the letter Hey, which is to say, it's a name of God. In other words, if you were to stop me in this story at this point and ask me, what does she believe in? What religion is she? I would say she is Jewish, and she believes in the same God that I do. She invokes that God. She didn't, there were Canaanite gods. Can anyone name any of the Canaanite gods? Baal, right. Baal is perhaps the most famous one. Baal actually wasn't just one god. Baal was a franchise. No, I'm not kidding. If you're familiar with the town of Baalbek, up in Lebanon, there was Baal Gad, there's Baal Tzfon. There were all sorts of different Baals in different places. Baal means, it can mean a few different things, but one thing it means is master. It was a male fertility god, and it was supposed to be associated with the crops growing well. You had Baal was one, you had Ashtaroth, or Astarte, that was another one. You had Dagon in certain regions. She doesn't bless her son to any of those. She invokes the God of the Jews. Baruch b'ni l'Hashem. Good. So far, so good. Continue in number 4 now. He returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother. Good boy. But his mother said, I hereby consecrate the silver to the Lord, transferring it to my son to make a sculptured image and a molten image. I now return it to you. The Hebrew for the sculptured image and molten image are pesel and masecha. The word pesel is perhaps the most common word used in Hebrew for an idol. Literally, it means something that's been sculpted. Lifsol is to sculpt. But it's usually used for idols. So she says, he gives her the money, and she says, I dedicate it to God to make a sculptured image, and I now return it to you. She gives him back the money. What does she expect him to do? Either he's a sculptor himself or to hire somebody, right? But look what happens. So when he gave the silver back to his mother, so now I don't know who's holding it, his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave it to a smith. He made of it a sculptured image and a molten image, which were kept in the house of Michah. So now, who's holding the money? The mother. So he gave it back to her. She gave it back to him. He gave it back to her. She went and got a smith and gave the smith 200 shekel of silver. Apparently she pockets the other 900. Right? No, that's what happens. You can do the math. But for the 200 silver, right, she gets a nice sculptured image. This is strange. If you take a look at source number 5 for a moment, this is the comment of Rabbi David Kimchi. Rabbi David Kimchi lived in, I believe, the 13th century. He might have been the 12th, but I think the 13th century. And he wrote a commentary on much of Tanakh, on the books of the prophets, as well as the Bible, Chumash. And he comments here on the exchange of the money back and forth. He says, the mother wants Michah to make this sculpture, and Michah is not interested. Michah did not wish to make the effort to create an idol in molten form. He returned it to his mother again. They're playing hot potato with the money. You do it. Right? And ultimately she says, okay, I'll do it. But then she gives him the sculpted form and he holds on to it. It stays in his house. Go back to number 4 now, please. We have to read the last couple of sentences there. Now the man Michah had a house of God, but I wasn't sure. As you read the text, it's not clear whether it means a house of God, capital G, meaning he has a synagogue. Is that what we're talking about? Or whether it means a house of God, lowercase g, it's a house of idols. But we are told he had made an ephod and teraphim. An ephod is some kind of a tunic associated with the clothing of priests when they serve. And teraphim are a very interesting thing. Because teraphim are some kind of a human form that sometimes biblically are associated with idolatry, and sometimes with like fortune telling, just like wanting to know the future. It's some kind of a religious thing, some kind of entity with special power to it. I shouldn't say religious necessarily, but it's associated with power. So Michah, now I'm doing both names, Michah or Michah, has a house of God, which may be a synagogue and it may be a house of idolatry. He has an ephod and a teraphim, and he had inducted one of his sons to be his priest. So one of his kids serves in this house of God of his, where he apparently has a sculpture as well, thanks to his mother. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did as he pleased. That's the line I referred you to before. So, right now, there are a number of different ways you could take this story. Right? You could look at this story legitimately and say that Michah is a God-serving Jew who has a house of God. He has his very own synagogue. Now keep in mind, in those days, what would a synagogue mean? Right? This is back in the period either 30 years after the Jews have entered the land, or even if it's at the end of the period of the Judges, which puts it a few centuries later, there is no temple in Jerusalem at this stage. You don't have that yet. You do have a temple that's in a place called Shiloh, where the Jews are supposed to come to bring sacrifices to God. So whatever he has going on in his house shouldn't be a place of sacrifice. It's some place of either worship for God, or alternatively, again, he actually has a house of idolatry. Can you suggest, based on what we've read so far of the story, and I recognize it's a little bit disjointed at this point, can you suggest evidence to support the idea either that this is a house of God, meaning Michah has a synagogue, or that this is a house of idolatry? Yeah?
Well, because he has this priest,
yeah.
personal priest, so it's a personal God that he has, and in those days, many tribes had their own sort of place where they worship their idols.
I'm going to repeat it, don't worry. Right.
So, to me, it's a place of, well, his God, his priest, his idol.
Right. So Marlene suggests this is his thing. This is not a house of God in the sense of Judaism, if I'm understanding you correctly. This is something idolatrous, as connoted by him having his own priest. It's his own setup. It's his private religious house. Judith and then, yeah. No? Okay, sorry. Yeah. Cheryl, sorry.
Okay. As you were telling, it's an important part. I kept thinking Christmas. You know, it's part secular, part God, part taking little bits from the surroundings.
Right.
So neither one nor the other are both.
Good. So Cheryl says that you read this and you think Chrismica. It is an assembly of elements of different religions. And that is indeed what may be going on here, because here you have, on the one hand, his mother says, "Blessed be to God," and she invokes the Jewish God, not some pagan one. And then on the other hand, she has a sculpture made, which is not associated generally with the way we worship. The biblical text says specifically you're not supposed to have molten images. And it's going to go there in the house of God with his own priest. So the idea of blending is very strong here, and in fact there's a term for it, which we're going to keep using. And that term is syncretism. I will go over onto the next page to write that one out in case it's not familiar. It just rolls off the tongue. I don't know why it wouldn't be familiar. The term is... syncretism. I'm not doing such a good job here. There we go. Okay, syncretism. You are blending together multiple systems. You can see the SYN beginning, right, to bring things together, as well as the CRET. I think also is part of that. But I didn't look it up beforehand, and my Latin is rusty. But what it refers to is, and certainly in this context, is a blending of different types of worship into something new. And that's what I think you are going to see here. But let's go into more of the story. Take a look at number 6. This is great. This picks up right where number 4 ended. After we said there's no king and everyone does as they please, which again is that note about people who are well-meaning. There was a young man from Bethlehem of Judah, from the clan of Judah. He was a Levi and had resided there as a sojourner. He's from the clan of Judah doesn't mean that he's necessarily on his father's side. He's a Levi, which means he's a Levite. He's from the tribe of Levi on his father's side. Maybe on his mother's side he's from the clan of Judah. That could be. But he's been living in Bethlehem in the tribe of Judah. However, he had only resided there as a sojourner. Levites, remember, did not own land. They had no tribal section. They survived with the tithes given to them by the nation, and they work in the temple. So he has been living in Bethlehem, in Bethlehem, being supported by tithes, but apparently the tithes have dried up. And so now he's on the move. This man had left the town of Bethlehem of Judah to take up residence wherever he could find a place. Meaning wherever he could find support. On his way, he came to the house of Michah in the hill country of Ephraim. He happens to end up there. That's not so odd for 2 reasons. Number 1, this region, bless you, is a central region. Much of what happens in the book of Judges actually takes place in this area. So this was the place to be. That's number 1. Number 2, Michah has a house of God. That suggests that people would go there. This was a central site. And actually, a third point, Michah, as we're going to see here, is a very hospitable man. He likes to have guests. So it makes sense that this young Levi goes to the house of Michah. "Where do you come from?" Michah asked him. He replied, "I am a Levi, from Bethlehem of Judah, and I am traveling to take up residence wherever I can find a place." Looking for a place? "Stay with me," Michah said to him, "and be a father and a priest to me, and I will pay you 10 shekels of silver a year." 10 shekels of silver a year. He had 1,100 silver coins before, right? His mother spent 200 of them on the idol, right? 10 shekels of silver a year for the Levi. He's selling himself cheap. An allowance of clothing and your food. The Levi went. The Levi agreed to stay with the man. And the youth became like one of his own sons. Is anything strange in the sentences we just read? Yes. What is strange? First of all, be a father and a priest to me. Being a father means what in this context? Well, he's young, it seems. Michah already has a son. So this fellow is not going to be Michah's father, this young Levi. What does it mean to be a father? A teacher. Right. A teacher, a leader, a guide. Right? be my father and my priest. What's odd about that? Sorry?
You already have a priest.
Well, he had his son as a priest, right? So he's now, dropping his son. He must see something in this young man.
He's moving the Levi out from a Levi to a Kohen.
Right, the Levi is now a Kohen. That's really interesting. Remember the way that the lineage works. Okay? We had originally 12 tribes. One of them is Levi. Levi has 3 sons. I'm just going to put initials for space. Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. Kahat has 4 sons. Amram, Yitzhar, Hebron, and Uziel. Amram has 3 children, Miriam, Aharon, and Moshe. Okay? Now, Aharon is the one whose kids are going to be priests, Kohanim. Everybody else, Levian. You can't become a priest, right? You know the old joke about the one who goes to the rabbi and says, I want to be a Kohen? Right, you've heard this? No? Oh, I get to tell this to an audience! This is exciting. This is a joke that you hear and everybody always groans when you want to tell it because they know it. This is great. So the joke goes that there's a fellow who comes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I want to be a Kohen. I want to be a priest. And the rabbi says, I'm sorry, I can't make you into a Kohen. It doesn't work that way. You have to be born into it. Please, I really, really want to be. I can't make you. I'll give you anything. I'll give you $1,000. Maybe I can't do it. $10,000. I can't do it. $1 million. Just make me a Kohen. The rabbi says, okay, fine. You want to be a Kohen? Fine. $1 million. Nice donation. I'll make you a Kohen. But all right. After the fellow writes out the check, he says, but why was this so meaningful for you? Like, why did you want to be a Kohen? He says, because my father was a Kohen, my grandfather was a Kohen. Yeah. Okay. But the story here, again, is that this fellow is a Levi. He's not a Kohen. He's not a priest. This fellow decided, I'm going to make him into my priest. And I'm going to pay him for it, and I'm going to give him a place to stay. He'll have clothing. He'll have food. And then, did the Levi agree? Yes and no, right? Or no and yes, I should say. First it says the Levi went. Then it says the Levi agreed. In other words, think back to the beginning of the story. There's some convincing involved. First he says, I'm not going to do it. He turns to leave. And then he says, you know what? Not such a crazy idea. In the same way, at the beginning of the story, the mother wants the statue, right? She says to her son, make the statue. The son says, I don't want to do it. He gives her back the money. She goes and makes the statue, but then she gives it to him and he keeps it. It's a story of people being persuaded and talked into something that they know isn't right. That's what's going on here. And so look at what happens. Look at the next line. Still in number 6. The last lines of number 6. Michah inducted the Levi. The young man became his priest and remained in Michah's shrine. Now I know, Michah told himself, the Lord will prosper me since the Levi has become my priest. And notice again, he uses the name of God, like the Jewish God. God is going to help me because now I have a Levi as my Kohen, as my priest. Now you start to understand why Kaufman said in our first source, the story is being told for irony and humor. Right? You have somebody who's doing something wrong. He has set up his house with the idol in it. He has taken a Levi and said, poof, you're a Kohen. Right? And he thinks that this is going to make God happy. Syncretism, a little bit. And I think also just people who are doing what comes to mind, more or less. And the Levi is for sale cheap. We're not done with him either. But that's chapter 17 of the book of Judges. We have just learned a chapter from the Bible. Congratulations. So that introduces us to a new point as we move into chapter 18. And the new point requires another sheet of paper. I apologize, Marjorie. We're going to burn through your paper here.
Okay, it's coming up the road upstairs.
Okay. So, I have a terrible map drawer, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But roughly speaking, the biblical land of Israel looks kind of like this. Okay? Here you have the Mediterranean. Okay? Here you have the Jordan River. And then you have land east of the Jordan that is annexed as well, that 2.5 tribes move into. Okay. One of the tribes is Dan. Dan gets a portion of land over roughly here. In the west, south, just kind of southwest in the sense, because remember, the land didn't really extend all the way this far south in those days. No one was living in the deep Negev in any permanent way. That was a desert. But you're basically over here. This is where Dan's portion is initially. But there's a blessing that Jacob gives to Dan. Excuse me one second. Sorry. Moses gives a blessing to Dan. And he says that Dan will also burst forth from the area called Bashan. Bashan is the area way up here. That's where Bashan is. And what happens is, in the book of Judges, in fact, in the story we are about to read, a group from Dan says, this land here is not large enough for us, and they go up here and take more land for themselves. Clear? That's what's going to happen in this story. Dan is going to say, we want to move up here. That's one of the reasons why it is suggested that this story took place early in the book of Judges. Because this type of conquest would have happened early on, not centuries later. They would have said, we don't have enough land, let's go get land up north. That would have been early in the period of the Judges, not later on. But that's a side point. So Dan sends a mission of people to go up and scout out this land up here. The land up there is very vulnerable. The people up there are not generally exposed to war. This land is generally sparsely populated. It's way up in the mountains. It's a colder area. It's not on the main trade route that one would normally expect flanking the Mediterranean. And so they say, let's send a small group up to do some reconnaissance and see if we can get the land. Along the way, they travel through the mountains of Ephraim, and they stop off in the house of Michah. As I said, everybody goes through Michah's house. So take a look at source number 8. It's unclear whether this land they conquered up north, which will be called either Laish or Leshem in different places, whether this was supposed to be theirs or even part of Israel from the beginning. That's unclear. Take a look at number 8 now. In those days, there was no king in Israel, right? Our second statement that there's no king. And in those days, the tribe of Dan was seeking a territory in which to settle. For to that day, no territory had fallen to their lot among the tribes of Israel. They did have this portion down here. They didn't think it was sufficient. The Danites sent out 5 of their number from their clan seat of Sarah and Eshtaol, valiant men, to spy out the land and explore it. Go, they told them, and explore the land. When they had advanced into the hill country of Ephraim as far as the house of Michah, they stopped there for the night. So they're staying here, these 5 Danites. While in the vicinity of Michah's house, they recognized the speech of the young Levi. What does that mean? You recognize the speech of the young Levi. How did they know this Levi? So, sorry? His accent. So they knew him to be what? From Judah. Keep in mind, Judah's land is basically here and south. Judah and Dan are neighbors. The story of Samson takes place on the boundary between Dan and Judah. So they are neighbors, and indeed it's possible they recognize the accent. They may even have known him. He was a wanderer, remember. He was the sojourner, as they used in the JPS. He travels through the area trying to find support. So it could be they actually know him. So what happens, back in our story, they went over and asked him, what brought you to these parts? What are you doing in this place? What is your business here? He replied, thus and thus Michah did for me. He hired me and I became his priest. Do it nicely. And they said to him, please inquire of God. And again, it's not clear if this means the Jewish God or whatever it is they're worshiping in Michah's house. We would like to know if the mission on which we are going will be successful. Religious people turn to whatever this is going on in Michah's house, and they ask him for advice. Go in peace, the priest said to them. The Lord views with favor the mission you are going on. You are going to succeed. They do the consults, they ask these trafim, and the answer is it's going to go well. So they go up and they do the reconnaissance. And in fact, they believe the land is vulnerable. And then we get source number 9, which is the last piece we'll read from this story. They departed from there. This now is after they've come back already. They've reported to the people of Dan that they're going to be able to capture the land. So now the armed force comes forth from Dan to go to war. They departed from there, from the clan seat of the Danites, from Tzara and Eshtaol, 600 strong, girded with weapons of war. Only 600 men to conquer that land. They believe it's going to go easily. And it will, in truth. They went up and camped at Kiryat Yarim in Judah. That's why that place is called the Camp of Dan to this day. It lies west of Kiryat Yarim. From there they passed on to the hill country of Ephraim and arrived at the house of Michah. Once again. Here, the 5 men who had gone to spy out the Laish region, that's the one up north, remarked to their kinsmen, do you know, there is an ephod in these houses, and trafim, right, that we had talked about, the human form, the whole bit, and a sculptured image and a molten image. Now you know what you have to do. What does that mean, you know what you have to do? Destroy it? You think so? So they turned, that would have been a good answer. So they turned off there and entered the home of the young Levi at Michah's house and greeted him. The 600 Danite men, girded with their weapons of war, stood at the entrance of the gate, while the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land went inside and took the sculptured image, the ephod, the trafim, and the molten image. They're not interested in destroying it. They're interested in taking it. The priest was standing at the entrance of the gate, the 600 men girt with their weapons of war, while those men entered Michah's house and took the sculptured image and the molten image, the ephod, and the household gods. The priest said to them, what are you doing? But they said to him, be quiet, put your hand on your mouth. Come with us and be our father and priest. Would you rather be priest to one man's household or be priest to a tribe and clan in Israel? It's an upgrade. This is great. First you were a Levi who had nowhere to go and no means of support. Then he showed up here and he made you a priest for his house, and it's a pretty happening place. But now, you can be a priest for an entire tribe. The priest was delighted. He took the ephod, the household gods, and the sculptured image. He did it himself, and he joined the people. They set out again, placing the children, the cattle, and their household goods in front. They're really confident of victory. They brought their kids along. They had already gone some distance from Michah's house when the men in the houses near Michah's mustered and caught up with the Danites. They called out to the Danites, who turned around and said to Michah, what's the matter? Why have you mustered? What's going on? What are you upset about? He said, well, you've taken my priest and the gods that I made and walked off. What do I have left? How can you ask, what's the matter? You want to know why I'm upset? You stole my gods. Right? Remember that line that we mentioned in the beginning? But the Danites replied, don't do any shouting at us, or some desperate men might attack you and your family would lose your lives. In other words, turn around and go back into the house, right? Because we're armed men who are on our way to conquer a territory, and really we wouldn't think twice. That's their response. So Michah, realizing they were stronger than he, turned back and went home. And the Danites went on their way, taking the things Michah had made and the priest he had acquired. They proceeded to Laish, a people tranquil and unsuspecting, and they put them to the sword and burned down the town. That is our story. It's a hard story, no? Yes, they are. Let's not kid ourselves. That's exactly what they are, sorry. These are, as was said here, these are our ancestors. This is what we're talking about. I mean, they're technically, biologically not, in the sense that the tribe of Dan is exiled with the 10 lost tribes. So we can, at least say that. But go back to the first source, Professor Kaufman's comment. Because now I think we're ready to understand what he's talking about. The author tells his story in an ironic tone. Michah speaks like an idolatrous fetishist. You have taken the God I made. You stole my God, right? When he comes running out of the house after them. The Kohen is described as a frivolous careerist, right? Hey, I'm going to work here. I'm going to work there. It's going to be good for me. And the people of done are fist fighters, lawless and thieving. Right? They come in, they steal the idol, they take away the priest, they threaten him when he comes out to complain, and then they go burn down a town. Right? There are no nice people in this story. Or I shouldn't say nice. Michah sounds like a nice man. He's very welcoming of guests. But what we're seeing here is really, I think, a group without a very clear Jewish moral compass. Right? They have, to go back to the term we used before, the syncretism term, they have gone native in the land that had been the land of Canaan. They've adopted elements of Canaanite culture into their own lifestyle and even into their own religious service. So whether you're talking about the people of Dan who have become the opposite of what we were supposed to be, they are thieves, they are idolatrous, right? They stole the molten images, and they're going to go burn down this town, which wasn't even part of their portion in the first place. Their portion was down here. Right? They decided, we want more land. We're going up north over there. A land which may not even be part of the biblical land of Israel. The commentators dispute that. The people of Dan are not our role models. You have Michah, who initially doesn't want anything to do with the molten images. He has his house of God, but ultimately takes it into his house and then hires a Kohen, a Levi, to serve as his priest. And then you have the Levi, who, again, is just interested, it seems, in pursuing status and in pursuing money. And what we get to here is the idea that we saw in 2 verses here, which was, there is no king in Israel, and people do whatever is good in their eyes. I think this is a good thing to do, and let's not leave out, I shouldn't have left her out, right, Michah's mother. In all of this. Sorry? Well, I don't know, but I don't blame her for everything, but she's certainly the catalyst.
She set the moral standard.
Right.
It isn't. So when people in a household do that, the consequences can't be.
Right. And especially when you think about the beginning of the story, what was her first action? What did she do in the very beginning? She issued a curse on whoever had stolen it, and then afterwards, when she gets the money back, then she wants to give him a blessing to counter it. This is somebody who is not what we would think of as serious. There's a certain frivolousness and sort of knee-jerk reaction to circumstance, which leads her to do things at extremes. And what we're getting here is the danger of a well-meaning but misguided approach to Judaism and to life. He has a house of idolatry in which he's also going to worship God. Right? The kindness that's associated with him, he takes in guests, but in pursuit again of this house of idolatry, Michah himself is a good example of somebody who is indeed well-meaning. Take a look, please, on your sheet at source number 10. Anyone here ever read anything from a book called the Kuzari? Ring a bell at all? Anyone ever hear of the Chazars? Not Chazar, 2 entirely different things. Spelled differently, different word. No, okay. So the story of the Kuzari is as follows. There's a book which was written in Spain in the 11th century by a man by the name of Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi. Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi was a great philosopher. He was also a poet. He wrote beautiful religious poetry, as well as general poetry for that matter. Leading sage of his time, again, living in Muslim Spain in the 10th century or 11th? I think it might be 10th century. It could be the end of the 10th, it could be the beginning of the 11th. I'm forgetting right now. But he writes a book which is called The Kuzari, subtitle In Defense of the Despised Faith. He writes it in Arabic. That's usually the way it's translated into English. And it's meant to defend Judaism against the philosophers of his day, against the Muslims and Christians of his day, and he writes it as a dialogue. And as he tells the story, there is a king in an area in northern Turkey, king of a nation called the Khazars. They're not Jewish. And the king has a dream, which we're going to get to shortly, which leads him to investigate different religions. And so he brings a Muslim, he brings a Christian, and he brings a philosopher to talk about their beliefs. He doesn't bring a Jew, because the Jews are this tiny nothing nation, and who would respect them? But after he hears what each of these three speakers has to say, he says, you know what, I need to go ask a Jew as well, for reasons tied to the story itself. He says, I need to go ask a Jew, and he summons a Jew, and the Jew talks to him about Judaism, and ultimately he decides to become Jewish and even to convert his nation to Judaism. This story is anchored in fact. We just don't know how much fact. Meaning, there are those who argue there actually was a nation of Khazars and they converted to Judaism, they lived in northern Turkey, and so on. There are others who say no. What happened was, there was some debate at some point, and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi grabbed the legend and then fashioned his book around the legend, because this was a time when that was very stylish, to write this kind of a dialogue as a way of explaining your beliefs, and so this would attract the listener, and so that's why he did it. Interestingly, the ones who support most the idea that this was a real nation and they converted are the anti-Semites. I'm not kidding. If you look at the Khazars online, you will find that there are those who make the argument that all Ashkenazi Jews came from the Khazars and are not, so to speak, original biological Jews. Their argument essentially goes like this. The original Jews who lived in the land of Israel were dispersed and disappeared in their exile. The Ashkenazi Jews, who formed a major part of the Zionists of the late 19th century, early 20th century, and came to Israel, are descendants of the Khazars and therefore have no claim to the land of Israel. You can look it up online. You'll find them say it. It's fascinating. It's entirely foolish, but it's fascinating anyway. Yes?
Genetically.
Yeah. Completely.
The Ashkenazi Jews are closer genetically to Middle Eastern Jews than they are to people within Israel.
Right. Cheryl makes the point, which is entirely correct and has been bolstered by a number of studies, that DNA tests have shown that Ashkenazi Jews are, number one, closer to other Jews elsewhere than they are to other populations, but number two, even beyond that Israeli Jews tend to be closer in DNA to the other residents of the Middle East, non-Jewish residents of the Middle East, than they are to other populations. So no, there's no merit to the claim, but that doesn't really stop them, oddly enough. So I tell you this because of the beginning of the Kuzari, the story of the Khazar king and what inspires him to make his investigation. Take a look at source number 10. This is talking about the king. He experienced a repeated dream, as though a malach, an angel, spoke with him, saying, your intent is desirable to the Creator, but your deeds are not desirable. Meaning, he's trying to serve God, but he's doing it the wrong way. And he has this dream. He tried hard within the Khazar religion, serving in their sanctuary, bringing offerings wholeheartedly. For all that he worked at those deeds, though, the Malach came to him at night and said, your intent is desirable, but your deeds are not desirable. And this caused him to investigate beliefs and religions, and in the end, he and many Khazars converted to Judaism. The idea that somebody might mean well and come up with what they believe is religious service, but not provide what it is that God wants them to do, that's at the heart of the Kuzari, and that's at the heart of this story as well. When you look at what's going on in this fellow Michah's house, he's trying to do something good. I think as I read the story, he is benign in his intentions, but he's way off. He's got his molten images, he's going to take the Levi and make him into a Kohen, into a priest. What he's doing, and many commentators suggest this, is indeed syncretism. If you take a look on your sheet at source number 11, Rabbi Levi ben Gershon, Ralbag, says, he's talking about the things that were in the house of Michah, this molten form. These, and the trafim, he says, these were forms with which people erred in those days, thinking they had the ability to tell the future by awakening the forces of intuition. It appears that this is why he made it at first, why he made his house of God, not for idolatry. And this is indicated by her statement, the mother's statement, I have dedicated the money to God. They called it house of God, thinking that the Shekhinah, God, would be manifest there. Or if you take a look at source number 12, Professor Kaufman makes the point. The religious faith displayed here includes an idolatrous slant. Michah and his mother revere God. They bless in the name of God. The mother consecrates a large sum of money to God. Michah has a house of God. He gives one of his sons the role of priest. But he's happy when he succeeds in establishing in his house of God a Kohen of the tribe of Levi. And he is confident that God will benefit him now. And not only this, but the faith displayed here is monotheistic. There is no mention of serving foreign gods. Baal, Astarte, they're not mentioned here. That's the idea. Michah is drawn into this as he follows his own desire and his own instinct, trying to serve God. And the Levi as well. The Levi gets drawn into it by progression. Take a look at source number 15. Comment by Rabbi Meir Leibush Malbim in source number 15. He says, and going with the text that we noted where it said the Levi went, and then it said he agreed. So he says, and the Levi went. It told that he did not want to hire himself out for idolatry at first. And he left. And the Levi agreed. He was persuaded to stay with the man. First he just agreed to stay with the man. Not to be a father and Kohen, just to stay in the house for some time. And the youth was as one of his children, meaning eating at his table. And then, because he stayed in the house of the wicked, he was drawn after him. But we haven't yet seen the most perplexing part of this story. We've seen a lot of things that are hard to understand. But you haven't seen the most perplexing. Take a look, please, at source number 16. We have like 5 minutes, but we'll get this in. This is truly remarkable. The last line in the story says the following. The Danites set up the sculptured image for themselves. And Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Menashe, and his descendants served as priests to the Danite tribe until the land went into exile. We finally get the name of this mysterious Levi. His name is Yonatan, son of Gershom, son of Menashe. So to make a long story short, it's very odd that we get 3 generations here for this person, who's never appeared before. His name wasn't given in the story, and now it suddenly shows up. But even more striking is the way his grandfather's name is listed. If you were to read that in the Hebrew, you would see the name Menashe written this way. I realize that not everybody is a Hebrew reader, and that everybody can see it from a distance. But I'm going to show you what it is. Menashe is written with the nun suspended above the line. If you were to look in a proper scroll of the book of Judges, Mem, nun up here, Shin, He. That's the way it says Menashe. That only occurs 4 times in the entire biblical text that a letter is above the line, and always the rabbis look at it and say, there's a message here. I'm supposed to read it with and without. If you take out that nun, you're left with Moshe. And while there's no one in the biblical text named Yonatan, son of Gershom, son of Menashe, there is someone named Yonatan, son of Gershom, son of Moshe, because Moshe, as in Moses, the Moses, had a son named Gershom. And so the suggestion of the Talmud is that this is none other than the grandson of Moses. That's your Levi. And then the question is, so what's the nun doing there? And so the suggestion is that they wanted to hide that. Because rather than shame Moses, that his grandson became a priest for idolatry, let's mask it by at least doing Menashe and hide the name at the end of the story. Now, there's a lot more to be said about the evidence for this being Moses' grandson. There's a lot more that's embedded within the story itself that we don't have time for, that explains why the Talmud makes the association. But the Talmud asks the question you have to ask. How could the grandson of Moses fall into being a priest for idolatry. I mean, that's it. There's just no hope for any of our kids. If the grandson of Moses can do that, what do you have? Take a look at source number 17, where they explain, based on a term in Hebrew. How do you say idolatry in Hebrew? There's a term for it. Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah. Worship or service which is foreign. But that's not the only way to translate the term. Avodah can mean work. So Avodah Zarah would mean work, which is foreign. Okay, there's either Avodah Zarah, which is to say, foreign service, or Avodah Zarah, which is foreign work. Keep that in mind. He replied to them. When they asked this Levi, the grandson of Moses, how he could do this, he said, "This is my tradition from my grandfather. One should hire himself out to Avodah Zarah and not need others. If you're in a position of financial need, better to take on Avodah Zarah than to get help from other people." So he thought that meant better to become a servant of idolatry. What his grandfather actually meant was take on work which is foreign to you. You know, there was a story in the news the other day about someone who was some celebrity from television who's now an Uber driver. I don't know if you saw the article online. And then a few months ago there was another one about an actor, it was last year, about an actor who is now bagging groceries in a supermarket. And in each case, someone attempted to shame them for the job. And their response was, it's a living. There's no shame in working hard and making an honest wage. So that's what happens here. Moses' statement is, don't stand on your status as my grandson and say, therefore, I'm not going to take on work. It's beneath my status. Better that you work at whatever it is in order to support yourself than need the assistance of others. And he mistook it. He took Avodah Zarah not to mean foreign work, but rather service of a foreign god. Now, what the Talmud is reading into the story is fascinating on many levels and needs more discussion. That's not for right now, clearly, because it's going to be 11 o'clock in a second. Or maybe it was a second ago. But the point is, and what I'm trying to get at is, that it fits the theme of the story. It's somebody who thinks he's doing something right, but gets it backwards. He thinks he's fulfilling his grandfather's instructions. But in fact, he's perverting everything his grandfather stood for. And so it fits with the theme of the story as a whole. And the lesson that I think we're supposed to learn from this, and we didn't get back to every detail. I didn't get back to whether this is in the beginning of that period or the end of the period of the Judges. But the lesson that we're supposed to take away, and that Tanakh is trying to teach us here, is that good intentions really aren't enough. It isn't enough for a person to say, I mean well. I'm doing the best I can. This is what I think matters. It's a polemic, essentially, that says, look to your mentors. Look to the tradition that you come from. Look to your teachers to try to give you guidance so that, yes, bring in all of your good intentions. Bring in the desire to do right. Whether it's Michah's desire to host other people in his home, whether it's the desire to serve God. These are all valuable. But ultimately they have to be informed by religious instruction, or you end up like Michah, you end up like his Levi, you end up like the tribe of Dan, people who started out meaning well and ended up becoming corrupt instead. Thank you very much.